New Historicism is a fairly new literary theory developed in the 1980s around the ideas of Stephen Greenblatt and Michel Foucault. This theory holds that in order to understand a text, the reader must consider the time period in which the author wrote it, particularly the power structure, ideology, and society that the author experienced. Thus, a work can't be viewed individually, but rather must be viewed in conjunction with the culture of its time. New historicists also believe that history can't be viewed neutrally, and that works must be considered with diverse judgments and bias, separating New Historicism from traditional historicism. Overall, New Historicists consider literary works to be byproducts of the economic and social realities of an author's life based on the time period in which they lived and how they felt about these realities. When specifically looking at The King Must Die, one must consider the various aspects of Mary Renault's time that influenced how she wrote her novels, especially her opinions on these ideals shown in her writing.
The King Must Die was written during the 1950s, a time when women were often oppressed in the workforce and positions of leadership, which may have influenced how Mary Renault conveyed her ideas of matriarchal and patriarchal societies. Within the novel, the matriarchal societies were perceived by Theseus as archaic and brutal, and he had negative feelings toward their savage customs and backwards leadership, shown by his reticence to participate in the vicious sacrifice of the king of Eleusis on pages 70 through 72. In Eleusis especially, he found it appalling that although the men would be better at ruling, the women held all the power. An example of this is on page 78, in which Theseus, speaking of the queen, states, "I learned by chance that she had seen an embassy from Rhodes and never even told me. No one had so insulted me since my childhood. What does she take me for?" The patriarchal societies, such as Troyes, where he grew up, in Athens, where his father ruled, were respected by Theseus and seen as modern and efficient, and he tried to implement this hierarchy in the cities he traveled to. Perhaps Renault displayed such a preference for male domination within the novel because the world around her was also male-dominated. The way she portrays these societies shows that she supported the traditional role of women in society and was against the feminist push that many countries experienced following World War II, as men came back from the war to reclaim the jobs that women had taken over.
Another aspect to consider from the time period in which The King Must Die was written is religious beliefs. At this point, the idea of polytheism to explain Earth's phenomena was long outdated from ancient Greece and Rome, and monotheism was more prevalent. There is no evidence that Renault was actively religious, despite over 3/4 of Great Britain, where she was raised, claiming to have a religious affiliation. Therefore, Renault decided to tell the story of Theseus with more realistic explanations for what was believed to be the interference of the gods. For example, whenever Theseus received a message from Poseidon, it came in the form of a headache or the movement of the sea. Nothing is really able to prove that the natural occurrences were in fact Poseidon. On page 163 of the novel, Theseus hears Poseidon telling him to volunteer to be a part of the bull court and take the place of another boy. Theseus asks a question of Poseidon and states, "So I bowed my head lower, till my hair trailed the dust, and then he spoke to me. I heard, as if it rose from the depths of the earth, the sound of the sea surge, waves that mounted and broke in hissing form. And their sound said, 'Theseus, Theseus.'" Realistically, this sound could have been the noises of the ocean traveling through the earth, or the fact that Theseus was close enough to the shore to hear the sea in the distance when he focused on it. On page 288, Theseus receives a signal from Poseidon as a headache. "My skull seemed open and streaming with blue flames. It is a warning. Poseidon is coming. The house of the axe will fall." This headache, which he perceived to be a sign from the gods, could have been due to dehydration and delirium from the bull dance. These events are therefore the author's interpretation of ancient events, based on the fact that Renault did not hold the belief that the gods were in direct communication with the people, and it is possible that she did not believe in any god at all.
A final aspect of Renault's life that should be taken into consideration in reference to The King Must Die is that she was a homosexual who felt oppressed for her beliefs, eventually moving to South Africa to join a gay community. Renault's homosexuality did not conform to the standards of English society in the 1950s when people were incarcerated for being openly gay. She did not overtly challenge the normal heterosexual relationship, but instead alluded to the idea that being homosexual was an acceptable human quality. While Theseus was heterosexual, it can be inferred that some supporting characters in the novel, like Thalestris, were homosexual. For example, on page 268, Theseus states, "Thalestris was a girl for girls, but it is a thing I have found, that no woman likes to hear you hold forth about another, comparing her equally to any other girl when explaining why he didn't tell her about Ariadne." Another example of Renault's acceptance of homosexuality is when Theseus and Antor were accused of being lovers in the bull court because they spent so much time together. Theseus reacts by saying that he wasn't offended by the accusations and merely laughed it off, as being gay was nothing to be ashamed of. This is seen on page 258 when Theseus states, It was rumored in the palace that we were lovers. We no longer put ourselves out to deny this. It saved us from the nonsense of Gnostic courtiers with their flowers and mincing verses and lurkings in the night, and gave us something to laugh at. It can be inferred that because of Renault's own experience with being gay in a very unaccepting society, she chose to subtly portray homosexuality in a positive light to rid the stigma around gays.
As you can see, it is very difficult to view the work The King Must Die by itself without recognizing the aspects of the author's life and time period as having substantial influence on the novel. Analyzing these factors that go into the creation of a work is the purpose of New Historicism, and without it, the reader would not be able to grasp a full understanding of the work's significance.